Hello, everyone. I am Professor Geek. Welcome back to the channel. I wanted to give some thoughts on what I'm calling, I think that we in our society today are indulging the trickster archetype far too much. And I'll say what I mean by that in a second. I don't mean that we have too many trickster characters or anything, because I've done the archetype videos and I've talked about how Spider-Man, for example, or Bugs Bunny. I'm not saying we have too many of those characters or anything. I mean that we as a society are indulging that archetype too much. One of the things that cued me into this or got me thinking along these lines was this ridiculous Time magazine article that came out recently. A lot of people know about it. It's been written about. A lot of people are doing videos about it. The usual suspects involved. The writer is a feminist writer, identifies heavily as a feminist writer. And with all of I'm going to try and avoid all of the watchwords and the language that the algorithms don't like. With all of the things going on in society at the moment, all of the activisms and the pushes and the cultural moves and the agendas and things that people are demanding be done right away, the article was saying that superheroes should be next. They are the next ones to go. They're too white, basically. That's the idea. So this is a problem. The trickster. Let me go back and we'll talk about the trickster. So if you remember my trickster archetype video, and I'll place a link to it somewhere on this when I re-release it as the video, the trickster is useful. The archetype is useful. And I'll give you some examples. I'll go back all the way to, say, Native American tricksters, or American Indian, however you want to say it, tricksters of mythology back when. And that's usually what I start out my class with. I'll start out looking at some of those trickster mythologies. At that time, you had all these disparate tribes living in different regions or different, places or whatever, more nomadic than others, some, but you had them separated. This was this tribe, this was that tribe, and the two didn't really cross so much, unless there was going to be a conflict or war or whatever. But all of these different tribes had similar stories about the trickster. They would have a different animal, perhaps, that would symbolize the trickster or something like that. But in all of these stories, the trickster blurred boundaries. The trickster in these tales would go out in between tribes. He was a creature, a god of the roads, and he would go out on the roads in between these tribes, and he would go into another tribe, and he would do this or that, and he would blur boundaries, whether it was just the tribes themselves, or genders, or boundaries about practice of eating certain berries and whatnot in the forest, practices of hunting and whatnot. These kinds of stories would inspire tribes that need to maintain a exclusivity of their tribe if their tribe's going to survive. You can't just open up everything and not have any kind of cultural identity if you want your culture to survive. But a cultural gene pool will stagnate, just as a biological gene pool will, unless you introduce some new material from time. So the trickster encouraged that. The trickster stories encouraged, every now and then we question what's going on with our rules, with our taboos, with our culture. Every now and then we bring that into question so that maybe we can blur a boundary or two and bring in some new info or new material or new ways of doing things. And that was really useful to, you can imagine how that's useful to different tribes coexisting. You've got one tribe that's really great at, say, agriculture or something, and another one that's really good at, pottery or hunting. I'm just totally making this up just for example, but you end up getting that knowledge filtered and shared across the boundaries. If it's not done too much, you can't break down the boundaries altogether, or the tribe loses its cultural identity. But if it's done to a certain amount, that's good. So the trickster's useful. Trickster blurring those boundaries is useful. Now, that idea, I said the trickster questions everything, questions authority, and points out the problems with authority. You can see how this is kind of something that anybody does in their natural lifespan at some point. This is the adolescent age. The adolescent comes of age, realizes that the things the previous generation or mom and dad said to do, or the government, of the old days or whatever said, these are clearly all wrong, because now this person has come of age and has defined the very world by his existence or her existence, and they're ready to change the world. Their generation is going to be the one to get it all right and fix it, right? That's common. That's something that every age, every generation goes through when they get to a certain point. But if you look at American culture, I would say from the 60s on to this point, we've had generations come and go. So it's not just one generation. But from the 60s on, we've had this heavy push against our push for questioning everything, question edition, and it's increased and increased and increased. It hasn't ebbed and flowed, I would argue. And I'm speaking overall in generalities, of course. You know, we're packing a lot of American history into one, or Western history, whatever, into one little brief talk. But we've seen a strong progression of what it is to constantly question, to constantly find tradition or ways of doing things previously suspicious. We don't like that. And it's even built into the conservative liberal dichotomy. And I'm not necessarily even talking Republican Democrat. I'm just talking about liberal or conservatism. I mean, the general definitions of those. One who's conservative is one who holds fast to the established way of doing things, one who's conservative about that. And the liberal is one who lets more things in, is liberal. You know, as I explained with the trickster, when you need some sort of cultural identity for exclusivity, but you also need to introduce new material, you can tell that there needs to be some sort of balance of that. Again, I'm not speaking about specific politics. I'm just speaking of the big cultural ideas of conservatism or liberalism. So you can see why you need that balance, but we're seeing that balance disappear. Everything is to be questioned. And when certain things happen in culture, incendiary things, you know, tragedies or whatever, that make people even angrier, bring emotions to the boil, then because we've had this progression of society of getting closer and closer to the trickster, you know, to the idea that we can tear down anything that looks like a tradition, nothing's sacred, we can just question everything. After all, we are the young ones, we're the ones that are going to set it all right because we're enlightened now. You know, there's this sort of privilege of our privilege. I use that word, sorry, but there is this preference, you know, this idea that just because we are the most recent human beings on the earth, that necessarily means that we are the ones that have it, you know, better or more figured out than anybody else, any other previous generation. That's simply, it's not necessarily the case. It's not necessarily a truth. So we've got this idea, and things, incendiary tragedies happen, emotions boil, and people become more and more at home with being able to go out and tear things down. Literally right now, we're seeing the statues and stuff like that torn down. And there's not a lot, when you step back and you look at some of these things logically, there's not a lot of rhyme or reason for it. There simply isn't any reason for St. Louis to be torn down. There simply wasn't any reason for St. Sarah to be torn down. There's really no reason for Lincoln to be torn down. You can argue this and that, but the idea is, you know, even if you want to argue and have a valid debate about whether some of these statues that are associated with the characters of this historical event or not, or should be venerated in public squares, you can have that debate, but very little people are doing the research. Very little people, whatever they're going to end up deciding, want to even bother taking into account that, hey, well, yeah, actually, there's more to Chris Columbus than people think or whatever. Actually, if this is our impetus and if this is what we're doing, why... why the hell is Margaret Sanger's statue still up in New York City? It's very clear why, because she's the founder of Planned Parenthood, and that's one little sacred cow, you know, that we're not allowed to question. But she was using abortion for a genocide of minorities. I mean, that's just a historical thing too. You can go look that up. But no, we don't want to talk about that. You know, so you step back and look at the logic of it, and you see that it is agenda driven. And the agenda behind it is the trickster, or the agenda behind it, rather, is using the trickster to incite the public into this sort of wrath and into this sort of mob mentality to do the agenda's bidding. And that I remember, for example, when the thing in Charlottesville happened, and again, I'm trying to avoid some of the watchwords, but when the Triple K came in and did that thing, and I'm from Charlottesville, Virginia, so it was a visceral thing to happen. It was like, wow, this is horrible and everything like that. But I remember after that happened, obviously people were very upset and angry, understandably so. Emotions running high. What was going on? How could this happen? Well, some of my friends and I ran a couple of Facebook pages, and you guys know about them, the iconic Superman or iconic Wonder Woman and stuff like that. And, we would celebrate the traditional incarnations of those characters. And we placed, we would get cosplayers too sometimes cosplayers who did a really cool rendition of this character, whatever. We would post pictures. Well, apparently one cosplayer, I don't remember names or anything like that, but one cosplayer who was a pretty prominent, well-known cosplayer in the community and cosplaying, across the nation or whatever. She was actually part of the Triple K movement. She was even there. It was like, whoa, how did that happen? Well, you had people so angry that they would go out on these hunts, and it was their mission to expunge every image of this woman from the internet, just because they were angry, basically. Now, I'm not saying that their images should still be there, but we had posted some because we don't do background checks of the cosplayers we would post. We would just take the cool, iconic-looking costumes and post them. And I remember getting messages, veiled threats even. It was like this witch hunt, and it was like for, let's say, I can't remember which page it was, but let's just say it was the iconic Wonder Woman page. We get these messages on a post that we had done of this cosplayer years ago. So not even anything recently. Clearly, in no way could this be a statement of solidarity with her philosophies in any way. All we do is post pictures of superheroes. That was it. And the message was like, I'm assuming that you are in league with her philosophies then, since you still have her picture up. That's a bullying comment, right? That's a you had better take this down now, lest I, be forced to think these things about you. That's what it was. That's what it was. And people feel completely justified with that kind of behavior. They think that, they because we had this progression, this steamroll progression of the Trickster throughout the last half of the last century and on into this one, that we can tear down anything that's established. We can question anything and everything. And I'll wrap it up and end with this. The reason it's a problem to overindulge the Trickster, and this is a hard, bitter pill for activists to swallow. And I mean any activist of any cause, at some point they have to swallow this pill. The Trickster offers no solutions. The Trickster's great at questioning the systems at hand and the rules and the traditions and the things that are at play and the things we hold sacred. The Trickster's good at that. And every so often, those things should be called into question to a certain degree, just to reassert or reassess the situation, make sure we're still doing things properly. But the Trickster offers no solution. The Trickster's just there to question it. And people are nestling in so tightly to the Trickster that they don't know how to be a war hero and protect boundaries. They don't know how to be a detective and restore boundaries. They don't know how to be a paragon and provide the standards, which our boundaries should strive for. They have no clue of that, how to do that culturally, because they've just so enamored themselves with the idea of the Trickster. They think the Trickster is the be all and end all. The Trickster just tears everything down. And once you tear everything down, there's nothing else to question. It's a self-defeating archetype if you give yourself over to it completely, which I would argue our culture has been doing and is doing even more so now. And if you want to know why we're doing that, this is the drum I beat on my channel all the time. Look at our mythologies. Our mythologies have been doing that. We have been, long before people were tearing statues down, we've been tearing down heroes. What are the things I always talk about in this channel? The tragedy that Zack Snyder's movies did to Superman. Tear him down, get him dirty, muddy him up. He's not realistic enough. What did Disney Star Wars do to Skywalker? No, he can't be any kind of paragon. We got to make it more realistic. We got to tear him down, rough him up, muddy him up. And they do this over and over again. They've done it to Batman, even though Batman, other characters like that who can bear up under a certain amount of that treatment. They overdo it to so many different characters, because there's this sentiment that kind of story cannot possibly be useful to us. It's not realistic. It's not blah, blah, blah. Somebody commented on a Zack Snyder video today. It was like, how can the traditional Superman possibly do us any good? We need a more realistic and gritty take. What you need is a standard. You need a standard to strive for so that you can be better. You'll never reach up here. You never will reach up here. But as long as you're trying to reach up there, you'll at least get about this high. You start to bring that standard down to a realistic, attainable goal, then human nature is that you're not going to keep trying that hard to reach that goal. You'll just get about there, because that's, comparatively speaking, okay. And then we'll just keep going down from there, which is what we're doing. And we're going to question everything, problematize everything. This academia has started this. This is a big problem in academia ever since the 60s. Again, it's hip, it's cool to problematize things. Well, I just find that problematic, and here's why. Well, can you offer a solution? Well, no, not really. Or then somebody will try to offer a solution, but then the system eats itself. Yeah, but what I find problematic about that is blah blah blah. And you see that with heroes. You know, that this movement, this SJWism or activism or whatever you want to call it, doesn't have any heroes for very long. They eat their own. You know, they're hashtag cancel parties, you know, on Twitter, you know, about them or whatever. And the person does the slightest thing here, or they show that they actually had privilege here, and they're canceled. They can't maintain their own heroes. They couldn't even maintain their own structures were they allowed to replace those that they tore down. So it's a very brief kind of bite size. There's a lot in there. I could really do an exposition of this. We could talk for hours on it, but I wanted this to be enough for a bite-sized video. And if you guys want to talk more about this, though, we can do live streams on this kind of thing, because I think it's related to the content of my channel because it has to do with archetypes. Absolutely. It's the cultural archetypes and the consequence of the mythological archetypes we've indulged in.